Hi everyone, Menachem Brodie here with you once again from Human Vortex Training, your certified and experienced USA Cycling expert level coach, power-based certified coach, and strength and conditioning coach. Here today to talk about power meters. So it's a little bit of a bittersweet day here at Human Vortex Training. Our twice refurbished Powertap cycling Powertap hub is going to be going to a junior, up-and-coming juniors racer who's now ready to train with power. We've been working with him for about 2 weeks. Very promising young rider, so look for him in your results and also on the HVT page and the website. But today we're going to talk about power meters. What are the differences between the different power meters and what are some considerations that you should make when looking to purchase them? Now, the first things first, we're going to talk about what exactly is power and how do we measure it? What are we looking at when we are purchasing a power meter? What are we measuring? Simply put, power is the torque or a turning force times angular velocity or the speed of the crank. That's what gives us the power. So that takes us right into the gold standard of power meters, and that is the SRM power meter. This is not an SRM, this is simply a crank based here for us for a demonstration purposes, so you guys understand what we're talking about. I have a Quarq on my bike personally. We'll get into that in just a minute. The SRM is the gold standard. It's been around since the 1980s. Yuli's a fantastic guy, very smart, avid cyclist, just loves the bike. Cool Pittsburgh link. The person who checks the batteries and the strain gauges before they go out is actually from Pittsburgh. What's up, Ian? Really cool connection. Had a chance to meet those guys back in 2012, I think it was. But an SRM here, what it does is there's 4 different bridges connected between the chain rings and the crank itself on the drivetrain side, and that's really important. It is measuring the work for power where it is absolutely positively being done. So this is the best measure, in my opinion, that we have right now as of 2017 for a power meter, because it is measuring the force exactly where it is. So I know that the pedal systems talk about measuring the work where it's done, but that's further up. The work to turn that crank and move the bike is actually being done here. The pedal is a secondary motion further up on the line. But the SRM is measuring here. It is the gold standard for a number of reasons. Number one is the most accurate and precise. This is an important consideration that you need to take when looking at power meters. Road Cycling UK, or the British Road Cycling magazine, did a fantastic article on this in August of 2017. I've linked it below. Definitely take the 10 to 15 minutes to read that. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and also like this video, and check out our other videos on Human Vortex Training when we're done here talking about power meters, including how to train with power. We'll put a link up top. The SRM is measuring the 4 bridges right here and is going to allow us to have a true measurement. 4 different bridges, how much torque and how much speed is happening, and that is giving us a direct measure for power. Now, the SRM is a gold standard also because the battery lasts around 3,000 hours, which is fantastic, and it's recalibrated there in the shop itself, either at your mechanics, or I think it's done actually at the company when you send it back. Whereas the Quarq is going to be the next accurate and precise, if I'm not mistaken, for a crankbase, and I can change the battery myself. So I like the Quarq. My first power meter was a Powertap, and I like that. I'll talk about that at the end when we get to Powertap. But the SRM and the crankbase, if it's the drive side, like the Power 2 Max, the Quarq and the SRM are all drive side. So those are going to be the ones I hold in higher regard. These are really great power meters. The second kind at the cranks is going to be the stages. This is not a stages. This is just a crank arm from the FSA K-Force Lite, just for an example. The stages is actually built in just to the left crank. So you can purchase a crank off their website. It's far cheaper and far easier to put on. When I say easier, that's what they say on the website. It's easier to put on here, and that way any drivetrain, you don't have to do a lot of work on the bike. It's fairly simple. It's one bolt. You're able to open it and change the crank arm. So that's the stages. It's measuring non-drive side, which is very important to differentiate between drive side, where the work is being done, and non-drive side. So it's going to take the data and the deflection from the non-drive side and use an algorithm to take that data and give you a power output. a newer power meter, which has just come out in the last 8 months, is the Powerbeat. Now that's really interesting because it glues on down here, goes behind the pedal, and it measures out here and the pedal itself. So that's very new. I don't have any experience with that. I have seen some of their prototypes a while ago, so kind of cool. I'm not sure too much about that product, but it is something that I've very piqued my interest whenever I heard about it and saw it, because it's so small and so light. So that's another one that's coming out that's towards the pedal, but also it's going to be bilateral. So you have drive side and non-drive side. Again, remember that differentiation, because when we talk about drive side, that is where the Powertap is my choice as I was a beginner in training with power and later as a power-based coach. The reason I chose the Powertap, it was either get started training with power on a Powertap or wait another 2 or 3 months to save up the extra $2 grand to purchase a SRM. And I just did not want to wait for an SRM. I wanted to have data. I wanted to start experimenting on myself to bring my athletes the best possible results. And that was a fantastic decision. The Powertap served me well. It's also drive side. You'll notice here that the gears have been taken off, but the Powertap is strain gauges inside of the rear hub. So even though it's not being measured exactly where the work is being done in the crank, it's being done on the drivetrain side. So we're actually getting a deferred number on the same area, the same work that's being done just up the chain. So there also is an algorithm so that the strain gauges back here can figure out what the power numbers are as well. These are the two that I'd recommend. The SRM, the Quarq, or the Powertap would be my top 3, and then I'd go Power 2 Max, only because I don't have any experience with the Power 2 Max. But from what I understand, again, the Road Cycling UK article linked below is a good reference for you guys to talk about accuracy and precision, which are 2 very distinct and important considerations to have for power meters. So that's the Powertap. And what's great about this, I took my gears off because the Junior needs Junior gearing, but you can change the gears. Now the downside of the Powertap is that you have a wheel. So this is the DT Swiss 585, RR585. It is a bulletproof rim. And I asked the mechanic specifically for a bulletproof rim. The thing is that I sacrificed lightweight. And for a bigger rider like me, that's not something you want to do. So if you are thinking about a Powertap, remember, you're also going to race with that wheel. And that's actually important, especially I see a lot of triathletes make the mistake of not racing with the wheel, especially for half Ironman and Ironman. You want to have that information. It'll help make sure you're fueling well, despite wind conditions, things of that nature. And it'll also allow you to pace yourself well. So if you get a power meter and Powertap and you're going to race, remember you're going to want to race on that wheel. We still want to have the feel and not be staring at the cycle computer the whole time, but it is important to have that. So that's the Powertap. Then moving away from the drivetrain and the alternate drivetrain side is going to be the Vector. This is not a Vector and this is not the Powertap pedal system. This is simply an SPD to get you guys an idea of what it's measuring it. In the Vector website, they actually talk about how it's measuring the deflection all the way through your pedal stroke. So how much torque is going on here, and then it uses an algorithm for the Vector 2. It'll just be the one side that it's measuring, and the Vector 2S or the Vector 3 is going to measure both sides. But to me, that I'm just not quite sure how I feel about that for this reason, is that as an exercise scientist and a strength coach, when I first started riding the bike, the first thing that I noticed is how the hips, the legs are moving, and then how the feet are moving. And what's interesting is, even as a non-bike fitter, just as a bike rider, you notice that there's a lot of variations in how people pedal their bike. So that just, to me, makes it a lot harder, and there are a lot of very, very, very smart, far smarter than I am, people at Garmin that have worked on this over the years. So I'm sure they've taken that into the equation, but in my professional opinion, if you want to have the bilateral numbers, the pedal stroke to understand right, left, and balance, at this point, and if you guys have noticed here at HVT, we're already early adopters of the Leomo. And I like the Leomo because it gives us more than just left, right, and balance. It also gives us a dead spot score, and it also tells us how your limbs are moving. So you have a pod on your lower back, a pod on your upper leg, both legs, and both feet. So that gives us more data than the Vector. Now, that isn't to say that the Vector is not a good power meter. It is just my professional opinion that if we're going to spend about $2,000, or you have $2,000, I would much rather have you get a Quarq crankbase and the Leomo than getting the Vector. Now, I believe the Vector is price point around $1,000, if I'm not mistaken. So just that's one of the considerations you need to make for a power meter. Now, how do you choose which power meter is right for you? Which one do I recommend? You've already heard me say I personally have the Quarq. I personally would use the SRM. I personally have used the Powertap. The bottom line is you have to make the decision that's right for you. So if you really like the right, left, and balance measurement of the Garmin, or you know someone else who really loves that, then go ahead and purchase it. It's a matter of finding the power meter that works for you. The two things you need to remember is a power meter that estimates your power based off of heart rate, which there have been a couple on the market. It's trash. You can't estimate power based off of heart rate. It needs to be measuring the torque times the angular velocity. That's what it needs to do. And that's why the second thing is, don't buy a power meter that bases or estimates your power based off of wind resistance. That was also popular when I bought my Powertap back in the day, the I era. And I said it could possibly be accurate, but it's cheap for a reason, because it's just not that accurate. It's not that precise. It's taking an estimation based off of wind speed and a number of other variables. It's just too much that can go wrong. When you're choosing a power meter, the most important thing is to make sure that you're finding a power meter that fits in your budget and with your type of racing. If you're the type of racer or rider who likes to switch out wheels for certain rides, then don't buy a Powertap. Then you want to look at the stages, the Watt Team Power B, or a Quarq, or an SRM, or the Power 2 Max, or the Vector. If you're someone who wants to have the lightest pedals. So if you're on speed play, then you can't do Vector. So then you want to look at a crank-based. Or you can look at the stages or the power beat if you want. But I would say, in my professional opinion, I would go for drivetrain side. So that means a crank-based, the Power 2 Max, the SRM, or the Quarq. I personally have a Quarq. I personally had a Powertap, but I wasn't someone who was worried about changing wheels to have the fastest or lightest race wheels. And trust me, when I did blow a flat and took someone else's Shimals, it's a huge difference. So keep that in mind as you're looking for your power meter. Now, the nice thing about this is the price point for most of the power meters on the market now is around $1,000. So they're actually much more realistic to purchase than it was when I had the Powertap. So it was the Powertap for either $1,399 or an SRM for $3,000 back in the day. Those were my two choices. This is before the Garmin came out, the Vector or any other. Quarq came out, I think, 3 years after I bought my Powertap, but the market has changed significantly. So you, as a consumer, here in 2017 and 2018 and beyond, have far more choices than what we had back in the day. In fact, the head units have changed significantly. This was what I used to use. So there was no backlight. So when we were racing home against the sunset, we didn't see our power, and we set a lot of power meter records back then, Samson, Nemo, and I, and Andy, which was a lot of fun. We did have our headlights on. So Allegheny River Boulevard was our favorite coming back, racing against the sun. And then finally we had a backlight with the Joule, which gave us far more data. And nowadays, like we have with the Leomo or any of the unit heads now, we have far more information. So this gives us lap time, power, leg angular range, foot angular range, and a lot more. Training stress score, everything. Dead spot score. So these are the considerations that you want to keep in mind as you're going to purchase a power meter. Do I want to change wheels? Do I need to change pedals? Can the pedal system work with what I'm using right now? So I hope you guys found this to be really useful. There's a ton of information here. I know I went on for a little bit over, I think, 10 minutes or so, but there's a lot of information here for you guys because there's a lot to consider when you're looking at a power meter. Check out the link below to the Road Cycling UK article about accuracy and precision, because that is something you're going to want to think about with your power meter. The second thing is don't forget to subscribe and like this video. I have also, as you'll see here in a moment, we're going to have links to the training with power. So what do these power numbers mean and how do you use them to train? If you'd like to get in contact with me about coaching, you can email me, Brodie@humanvortextraining.com. Check out our Facebook page and our Instagram page. And remember, until next time, train smarter, not harder. Choose the right power meter that works for you, because it is all about you.